There is more to the Sukkah. Sukkot has arrived, and we wait with anticipation to enter the Sukkah and recall to mind the great blessings which our forefathers were granted to be free and to travel the desert in the company of the Creator of the universe. As Jews, we are familiar with this festival and its importance. It marks the end of a journey and the attainment of home. Sukkot has been our comfort during the hard, long years of exile. It has reminded us that these lands of our sojourn are not our home. That the life we lead among the Goyim is not our destiny, but it means so much more than just that. Our forefathers left the settled life in Egypt, where, despite the hardships and the suffering which caused them to cry out for help and deliverance, there was nevertheless stability. It is evident that through the centuries wherein we lived in Egypt, Israelites had moved from Goshen into the center of Egyptian populations. And undoubtedly, Egyptians had moved into Goshen, so that by the end of 430 years, Goshen was no longer exclusively Jewish. Nor other areas excluded to us. In fact, it was much like the land in which we now live. But as is the habit with Jewish people to this very day, Goshen was still largely identified with the Israelites. So when the plagues hit Egypt, it became evident that there was one area which remained untouched by the wrath of God. Only those who had assimilated into Egyptian life shared the fate of the rest of the country. Yet even they, when the death of the firstborn occurred, if they placed the blood upon the door, were safe. Sukkot brings all of this to mind. It reminds us of our going out from Egypt, and this is the theme which Hashem repeats time after time after time in the Torah. I am Hashem your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt. When we read the account of the journey through the wilderness, it becomes apparent that at least some of our fathers, when they had cried out for help, had not expected that help would come in the form of expulsion from the settled existence they were used to. They consistently longed after the life which they had left. However, resistant or not, all of Israel dwelt in these temporary shelters which were so easily dismantled and carried through the 40 years of wandering. They were not alone. In an incredible act of humility and love, the Eternal, who does not dwell in dwellings made by hands, who is more infinite than infinity, who has need of nothing because he is, commanded that we make also for him a sukkah, that he may dwell among us. Our sages, based on the Hebrew words used in Shemot 25 verse 8, tell us that what he actually commanded was a tabernacle in order that he might dwell within each and every Jew. In fact, the word mishkan, which we translate as tabernacle, comes from the word lishkon, to dwell. And when we read of it in the Torah, we discover that the mishkan was exclusively used of the holy place and the holiest of all. The mishkan was specifically the tent of meeting, where Hashem met with Moshe and subsequently with the Kohen HaGadol each Yom Kippur. But it had another name because in that holiest place there was only one piece of furniture: the Ark of the Testimony. So the received text in Revelation chapter 15 states that the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened. It's a more exact translation than the sanctuary, that is the tent of witness in heaven, was opened, because the Septuagint uses naos for temple and skeni for tabernacle and marturio for testimony or covenant, when speaking of the 10 words, all of which appear in this passage in Revelation: the temple, the tabernacle, and the covenant. When we speak of the tabernacle, it was a sukkah for the covenant, for the dwelling presence of the eternal on earth. And within it, in the holiest place, we find another sukkah mentioned in the Hebrew of Shemot 25 verse 20. We read there, "The cherubim will have their wings spread out above, so that their wings cover the ark, and their faces are toward each other and toward the ark cover." The word cover is sochim. It is derived from sukkah. This sukkah of the wings of the cherubim covered the ark cover, or the mercy seat, on which, according to Divrei Hayamim Aleph, 1 Chronicles 28:18, there was a representation of the Merkava, the chariot throne of God, a throne which was one with the cherubim, because God in manifestation rides upon the cherubim. The purpose of this chariot throne was to represent the ascension of the blood of the kapara on Yom Kippur to the presence of the Eternal. This brings Israel peace and forgiveness, but the temple of the sukkah of the covenant means something else too. If it is the place of Israel's acceptance and peace, and the writer to Ivrim, the Hebrews, in chapter 9 verse 24 assures us that the Mashiach entered the eternal sanctuary with his own blood to bring us that peace, then it is also the place of Hashem's wrath against the nations. When our fathers went out to war, the Ark of the Covenant was removed from the holiest place, and it went out ahead of them. And when Hashem permitted the Plishtim, the Philistines, to capture the ark, and they placed it in the house of Dagon, their god, from which the Christians get their symbol to this day, incidentally, their fish symbol, the next morning they found Dagon on his face before the ark, with his head fallen off. When they sent the ark up again to Israel on a riderless cart, Hashem killed 50,070 of the people of Beit Shemesh because they dared to look into it. When David wanted to bring it up to Jerusalem and Uzziah put out his hand to steady the ark, Hashem killed him for touching it. So if the sukkah, if the tabernacle was a tabernacle of the ark of the covenant, the place of peace and forgiveness and reconciliation, it was also the sukkah of the wrath of God. Because the Ark of the Covenant meant peace for Israel when the blood was sprinkled on it, but it meant the anger of God for the nations. So here is the lesson of the Sukkah. While Israel dwelled in the wilderness and temporary dwellings, they dwelled with Hashem. They were in absolute safety. Their enemies came against them, and the Ark containing Hashem's covenant and representing his Shekinah was brought against their enemies, and those who hated Hashem were scattered. Thus the Sukkah speaks to us of both Hashem's love and his wrath. Rabbi Yochanan writes of a day in which the temple of the Sukkah of the covenant in heaven will be opened against the earth and its inhabitants who desire the destruction of his people and his truth. We may well be living in the early part of that day. On that day, Hashem will go to war with the rebels of humanity, while Israel will dwell in the sukkah of his love. Those outside it will discover that it has concealed from them the wrath of the Eternal One. There is no fear of God before men's eyes. Even those who profess to know him, even those who profess to serve him, those who profess to be rabbis and teachers, there's no fear of God before their eyes, because if there was a fear of God, they would not do nor say the things they do or say. People live in a cloud of unreality. They live sheltered from the reality of the wrath and the anger of the God of Israel. But that's coming to an end. Soon the sukkah which covers up his wrath will be opened. Please take note of Revelation 16 verse 17. We read there, the seventh one, the seventh angel, poured out his bowl on the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." These words are reminiscent of another place and time when the sukkah of God was opened. When the veil in the temple was split in two, and the words of the Word who became flesh and made a sukkah amongst us cried out, "It is finished." This age is coming to an end. Just as the Mashiach came and provided the eternal sacrifice for sin and opened up the sukkah of the ark of the testimony of God on earth, so he will open the sukkah of the ark of the testimony of God in heaven to pour out wrath on the earth. These words, "It is finished," remind us that whereas Hashem made a sukkah in the humanity of the Mashiach to bring Israel forgiveness, he will finally open his sukkah again. And as he did when we left Egypt, he will judge mankind, and he will accomplish that which he intends. So as we enter the Sukkah tonight, we are reminded of the awesomeness and the wonder of our God, and of the privilege which is ours to travel with him in this exile, until finally we shall reach the eternal land, Israel, and be with him, present in the Mashiach forever. B'Shem Yeshua. In fact, it was much like the land in which we now live. But as is the habit with Jewish people to this very day, Goshen was still largely identified with the Israelites. So when the plagues hit Egypt, it became evident that there was one. We are familiar with this festival and its importance. It marks the end of a journey and the attainment of home. Sukkot has been our comfort during the hard, long years of exile. It has reminded us that these lands of our sojourn are not our home. That the life we lead among the Goyim is not our destiny, but it means so much more than just that. Our forefathers left the settled life in Egypt, where, despite the hardships and the suffering which caused them to cry out for help and deliverance, there was nevertheless stability. It is evident that through the centuries wherein we live, there is more to the Sukkah. Sukkot has arrived, and we wait with anticipation to enter the Sukkah and recall to mind the great blessings which our forefathers were granted to be free and to travel the desert in the company of the Creator of the universe. As Jews in Egypt, Israelites had moved from Goshen into the center of Egyptian populations. And undoubtedly, Egyptians had moved into Goshen, so that by the end of 430 years, Goshen was no longer exclusively Jewish. Nor other areas excluded to us.